So today we start a new section of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. We start section 40, which is washing for bread. In the large scale of things, we've now moved on from preparing food to actually having the meal. Yesterday we spoke about eating before the meal, and today we continue to talk about how a person washes for bread, which is obviously something practical anytime a person is sitting down for a meal. So this is how to go about it. But there's a lot of details involved in washing for bread. So, but please God, we will go through them one by one. Okay.
That's only you and me at the moment.
It is. Here we go. So somebody who wishes to eat bread for which hametzi is required must first wash his hands. So that's the halacha. It's actually a mitzvah. One of the 7 mitzvahs that the rabbis instituted was that before eating bread, we wash our hands. In short, the reason for this, the main reason for this is because in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, certain food had to be eaten with an added sense of purity. And in order not to end up eating that type of food while our hands are impure, so before we eat any bread, we wash our hands so as not to mix up with bread with food that was holy and required the washing of hands. So the Torah requires us to wash our hands before we eat holier food, and we do that before we eat any bread today. Also in anticipation of when Mashiach comes and we'll once again be able to eat from the holy food of the temple. There are other reasons as well. The idea that we shouldn't be indulging in our food, rather we should be elevated and elevate ourselves so that the food serves us rather than us being slaves to the food. But either way, it's a mitzvah to wash our hands before eating bread. So this is not something unique to Shabbos. It's actually any time we eat bread. As long as you're going to eat the equivalent of an egg, which is maybe about, if you were to go by grams, it would be about 54 grams. But many say it doesn't go by grams, it goes by size. It would be approximately 1 or 2 slices of bread. If you're having a slice or 2 of bread, then you should wash your hands before. When you wash your hands, you make the bracha. But if you're going to be eating less than a slice or 2, you still wash your hands, but you don't make the bracha. So in short, there's a mitzvah, a rabbinic mitzvah to wash our hands before bread. And if we're going to be eating at least a slice or 2, then we say the bracha al netilat yadayim. So these are all the conditions for washing our hands. Firstly, one needs to use a utensil that qualifies for washing one's hands. Now, which utensil qualifies for washing one's hands? So it should be large enough to hold the revius, which is about 86 mil, which is pretty small. It should be completely intact without any holes or cracks. It needs to be straight on top. So sometimes in a Judaica store, they might sell these fancy washing cups, but you got to make sure that it meets the halachic requirements, and that is that it is straight around the top. Without grooves or projecting parts, so like a pitcher wouldn't work. If you are going to use a pitcher that does have a spout, then make sure that when you wash from the side of the pitcher that doesn't have any protrusions, but rather that it's just straight. Okay. Yeah, that was number 2. So that was as far as the vessel. More about the vessel. A vessel that cannot stand without support. So if it's something that actually kind of maybe has a pointy bottom or an angled bottom, so it will fall over unless you put it on a stand or something like that. So if it was made to be used with a stand, then that's fine. It qualifies as a utensil. But if it was not made to be used as a utensil, but rather it was like just a little of a pot, for example, since it's not made as a utensil and it actually doesn't stand by itself, so that would not qualify for washing your hands. But pretty much any regular cup would qualify, unless it's cracked or has other types of deformities, holes, uneven. Okay, there are many more details, but this was the basics that we needed to know. That was as far as the vessel that the person is using. As far as the amount of water, you should use a fair amount of water, pour a fair amount of water on each hand. As one of the sages of the Talmud said, Rav Pista said, I washed with full handfuls of water and was granted full handfuls of goodness. Meaning the more water we use, the more bracha we bestow upon ourselves. So it's good to use a lot of water when washing our hands for hamotzi. Now you should wash your right hand first and then your left. In fact, according to Kabbalah, and this is Chabad custom as well, you want to do everything with the right. So you don't only start by pouring the water on your right hand, but you'll actually, let's say this was the washing cup, you'll actually pick it up with your right hand and then pass it to your left hand and then pour it onto your right hand. So you're both starting by pouring on the right and you started by raising it up with the right hand. So everything you do, you should start with the right.
When you're pouring the water into the pitcher, you holding it with your right hand, aren't you?
That doesn't matter. It's probably when you actually pick it up to start washing.
Okay.
But how you fill the pitcher doesn't matter.
Okay.
The water must cover your whole hand until the wrist. You find many people are kind of almost like just sprinkle it over their fingers, but that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to wash the entire hand from here all the way till here.
Yeah, that's only good for Tisha B'Av.
Correct. Only on Tisha B'Av we're not allowed to wash our hands, and then we minimize till about here. But then again, we're not washing for bread. So anytime you're washing for bread, you got to make sure that you wash all the way until the wrist. And no part of the hand should be untouched by water. So that's why you want to use a fair amount of water, so that if you just use a small amount, you might have dry spots. But you want to use a fair amount of water so that when you pour it, your entire hand gets covered by the water. Therefore, in order to accomplish this, your fingers should be parted slightly. So rather than having a fist or tight fingers, they should be open and raised somewhat upwards so that the water reaches the entire length of the fingers. The fingertips and the circumference of the fingers. I think it means raise somewhat upwards from the bottom of the sink, meaning you want to have it airborne so that the water can cover every part of the hand. The fingertips and the water should be poured on the hands in one flow. Therefore, you shouldn't wash from a container with a narrow mouth, like a soda bottle, from which the water cannot be emptied at one time. It is also proper to pour water twice in each hand. We'll talk about that in a moment. So you want to, in one pour, you want to get the water to cover everything. If you're going to use a thin water bottle, then it's going to kind of just be coming down in a thin stream. So it's going to be almost like it's not coming all in one shot. So rather, if you use a larger cup and in one shot, you cover the entire hand. And he says it's proper to pour twice on each hand. In fact, it became a custom in Chabad custom to pour 3 times on each hand. But the reason for that I'll leave for now. So that means that you actually pour consecutively. So you consecutively pour once and then twice, and possibly even 3 times, and then once and twice, and even 3 times. That's a difference. This is different from how we wash our hands in the morning when we wake up. When we wake up, we alternate. We go right, left, right, left, right, left. But when we wash for bread, we wash consecutively. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Or 1, 2, and 1, 2. Once he's washed his hands, once you've washed your hands, you should rub them together, lift them up, like the verse says, raise your hands. And before drying them, you should make the bracha Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu al b'tilas yadayim. But it's commanded us with the mitzvah of washing our hands. Now you might wonder, why are we only making the bracha after doing the mitzvah? Generally, we make brachas before we do a mitzvah. First you make a bracha and then you put on your talis. First you make a bracha and then you put on tefillin. First you make hamoitzi and then you eat. So why is it that over here, first you're washing your hands and then you're making the bracha? Do you know, Tzachi? No. So the reason is because before you've washed your hands are still dirty. So then it's not appropriate to be making a blessing. So you want to first have your hands clean, and only once you've reached that added spiritual purity, you go ahead and make the bracha. If you are pouring twice on each hand, you can already raise your hands and make the bracha after the first time you pour. I know Chabad custom is actually, though, to first wash the hands and then to raise the hands, touch and make the bracha al netilat yadayim. Don't dry them on your clothes, because this is one of the things that causes memory loss. Believe it or not, there are a number of things we don't know the connection that cause memory loss. A person shouldn't put on two garments at the same time. And another thing is that a person shouldn't dry their clothes on their hands on their clothes. So use a hand towel. Don't use your pants, because that causes forgetfulness. Okay, now what happens? So this pretty much is a rundown of the laws of washing their hands. You need to make sure that you've got a kosher vessel. You've got to make sure that you have a fair amount of water. And you've got to make sure that when you pour the water out of the kosher or the appropriate vessel, you cover the entire hand with the right amount of water, and that's it. So then you make the bracha al netilat yadayim. From the next halacha, from 6, we're going to speak about if things go wrong or if you're in pressed circumstances. So here we go. If after you pour water on one of your hands, you touch it with your other hands, or if somebody touched your hand. So basically, the way it works is like this. The first time you pour water on your hand, so that water removes the impurity from your hands. But as long as you haven't dried your hands, then if you touch that water, your hands will become impure again. Only once your hands are dry is the impurity completely removed. So if you washed your hands, and before drying this hand was touched by this hand. So instead of just pouring on it, you by mistake actually touched it. So since your hand is not yet dry, this hand will receive spiritual impurity from this hand. So therefore, you need to make sure that the hand that has already been purified isn't touched by a hand of somebody that hasn't yet washed his hands. This could also apply if you're sitting down to a Shabbos meal and somebody comes over and they want to shake your hand, or if they even give you something. If you've already washed and your hands aren't yet dried from those waters, and somebody else that hasn't yet washed touches your hand, then you need to go ahead and rewash. However, if you've already made the bracha, you don't make the bracha a second time. What happens if you don't have running water? You don't have a vessel to use to wash your hands. So if you don't have a vessel, then there are alternatives. You could actually dip your hands into a river, and through that wash for bread. I remember when I was in overnight camp as a child, once happened that on the campsite there was no running water, and everybody needed to wash for bread for lunch. So they took us all down to the lake. The campsite was on a lake, and we lined up, and one by one, we all dipped our hands in the water, and we made a bracha, and then proceeded to dry our hands and eat bread. But that was how we actually washed the bread. So I guess that wouldn't really help if you're living in Johannesburg and you have no water, because you probably are not living next to a river. So you can't just put it into your pool. It needs to either be in a river or in a kosher mikveh, or a natural spring. If it's a natural spring, then even if there's only a small amount of water, since it's coming straight out of the spring, you would be able to dip your hands in the spring and thereby wash your hands for bread, as long as your hands become completely covered by the water in one shot. If you are dipping your hands, then you would still say the standard bracha al netilat yadayim. So there's actually different opinions about this. Some say that you say a different bracha, which is al tevilas yadayim. Thank you, Hashem, for giving us the mitzvah, or shtifas yadayim, or a different word, not netilat yadayim, but shtifat yadayim. So tef means to wash. Netilat yadayim, literally, notel means to take. Some people say that the bracha al netilat yadayim refers to specifically taking the vessel and pouring the water. But if you're not using a vessel, then that bracha doesn't apply, and you would say al shtifas yadayim, washing your hands. In the Kitzur, I see he says you always say al netilat yadayim. So there's different opinions about that, but hopefully it's pretty unlikely in today's day and age that you'll have no running water and you will have a natural spring or river on site. But I guess it could be applied if maybe you're camping or you're on a hike and you've taken bread with you and you've limited with what you're taking on your hike. You don't have a vessel. And then you come past a stream of water, a lake, a spring. So that's what you would do. You would dip your hands in the water and say the bracha, either al shtifat yadayim or al netilas yadayim. Now, if in an emergency, if you need to eat bread and there is no mikveh, there's no running water, there's no spring, so what do? So you can actually immerse your hands in snow if amongst the snow there is enough water for a kosher mikveh. So if there's a lot of snow piled up, then you would actually be allowed to dip your hands into the snow, and that would constitute washing your hands for bread. If you're washing your hands from a pump, so again, if you've got to pump up the water, that's a problem. But we're talking about, I guess, like it's a spring. Oh no, I guess no, a pump is fine. Like the way we wash our hands today from the sink is like a pump, but really it should be a vessel. So I think it means if you had like a pump connected to a spring. So interesting. You place one hand near the ground, and with your other hand, you would work the pump to bring up the water, and then reverse, or get somebody else to do it for you. But if your hands are high above the ground, the washing is invalid. So this is for sure talking about a spring. So if the spring is making the water become airborne, if the pump is making the water of the spring detached from the ground, then it would no longer be like a spring, and then it wouldn't be valid since you don't have a vessel. So therefore, what you would want is your hands to be on surface level, and then use the pump to direct the spring water over your hand. This is obviously very unlikely, so we'll move along. What happens if the water is no good? So what qualifies? Earlier we said that you've got to have water, but what qualifies water that is kosher, that is fit for washing of the hands? So he says water that's become discolored, whether it's because of where the water is or something falling into the water. So that would make the water unfit for the tilat yadayim, for washing your hands. But if the change of color was just natural, the water just naturally changed color, and it isn't spoiled, as we'll say soon, then that's fine. So I guess, for example, if you wanted to use water from your pool, that should work. If your water is off, municipality water is off, and you want to wash for bread, you can take a vessel to the pool and dip it in the pool water and wash your hands onto wherever. Onto the grass, I guess, because you don't want to pour the unpure water back into the pool. So even if it's discolored, it's fine as long as it's natural. But if the water's already been used, for example, you used it to wash the dishes or to soak vegetables or to store containers of food for cooling, meaning you used the water for refrigeration, or it was used for measuring, so then that is unfit for washing your hands. Some people say that if water's already become despicable, that, for example, a dog drank from that water, then you wouldn't be allowed to use it to wash your hands. And so, yeah, you shouldn't use such water for washing the hands. A little bit more about the water. If you touch the water before you used it, so your hands are right now impure, and you touch the water, does that make the water impure? So it depends how you touched it. If you just happen to touch it, then that's fine. But if you touch it for the purpose of washing your hands or wetting your hands, then that makes the waters become disqualified. So if you leave the bathroom, you would be able to scoop a little bit of water out of the barrel or the bucket in order to clean your hands, and what's left would be fine because you weren't looking to use the rest of the water, you just touched it. But if you dabble your hands in the barrel to clean them, then that would disqualify those waters, and you'd have to use other waters. Finally, I see it's 5:20, wrapping up as far as waters. If the water is salty, spoiled, bitter, muddy, if it is so bad that a dog wouldn't want to drink from it, then that means that it is inappropriate to be used for the tilas yadayim. You wouldn't be able to use it for washing of the hands. So that brings us to 101, the first basics